So if you're building serverless apps on AWS, you have definitely hit this crossroad. You've got a process with multiple steps, right? And the big question is, do you connect all those dots with more code, or do you use a dedicated service to handle the orchestration? Well, that's what we're going to get into, the classic choice between step functions and Lambda. At the end of the day, it really boils down to this single question. Are you going to write more code to manage the flow of your application, or are you going to use a configuration-based service to do all that heavy lifting for you? That's the choice we're going to unpack right now. All right, let's start with the absolute hero of the serverless world, AWS Lambda. I mean, it's brilliant, right? You give it a piece of code and it just runs it. It kicks off in response to an event, could be a file upload, an API call, you name it. And a couple of key things to remember. It's stateless, so every run is a totally fresh start, and it's got that hard 15-minute time limit. It is just perfect for those single-purpose, event-driven jobs. And yeah, this is where things get really interesting. You know, a simple task like resizing an image, that's one thing. But what about a full-on customer order process? You've got to validate the order, then process the payment, then check the inventory, and finally send out a confirmation email. All of a sudden, one little function just isn't going to cut it. So the first thing a lot of us think to do, and it makes sense, is to just have the first Lambda function call the second one, which then calls the third one, and so on down the line. It feels logical, you know? It's all right there in your code, and it seems like a pretty straightforward way to build a sequence. And this is the absolute crucial point. This method, what we call Lambda Chaining, is widely considered an anti-pattern in the world of serverless architecture. It's one of those traps that looks really convenient at first, but it can create some major headaches down the road. So why is it such a bad idea? Well, let's break it down. First off, you've got double billing. Think about it. While your first function is waiting for the second one to finish, you are literally paying for both of them to be running. That's just wasted money on what we call idle wait. It also creates this tightly coupled, tangled web of functions that gets super hard to manage and debug. And finally, if something breaks anywhere in that chain, you have to write all the custom code yourself to handle those failures. Okay, so if stringing functions together with code is the wrong way to go, what's the right way? Well, the answer is to stop thinking about a chain and start thinking about an orchestrator, a service that is designed specifically to manage workflows like this. And that, my friends, brings us to AWS Step Functions. This service was built from the ground up to solve this exact problem. So instead of writing code that calls other functions, you define your entire workflow as a visual state machine. It's basically a flowchart that lays out all the logic, the flow, and even the error handling for your whole process. This is probably the best way to think about it. Your Lambda functions, they're the specialized workers on an assembly line. They're the raw compute engines that do one specific task really, really well. Step functions is the factory manager, the conductor of the orchestra. It's telling each worker what to do, when to do it, and what happens if something goes wrong. And just look at this. This is what that power looks like in practice. Instead of some tangled mess of code you have to decipher, you get this clean, visual map of your entire workflow. You can even see multiple tasks running in parallel here. Now, trying to code that manually in a Lambda chain would be an absolute nightmare, but in a step function state machine, it's actually pretty simple to set up. Okay, let's really put these two side by side and see how they stack up on the most important metrics. This is where the right choice is going to become a whole lot clearer. Looking at this table, the differences just jump right out at you. First, the use case. Single tasks for Lambda versus orchestrating big, multi-step workflows for step functions. But honestly, the real game changer here is the max execution time. 15 minutes for Lambda versus a whole year for a standard step function workflow. That just unlocks completely new possibilities. And notice how things like state and error handling move from your responsibility, your custom code, into the service's built-in features. That's huge. So let's drill down into those awesome built-in features. What are the actual superpowers you get when you choose configuration over writing more code for your workflow? Well, the visual builder itself is a massive win for just understanding and debugging your own application. But the real magic is the operational resilience. You can configure automatic retries with exponential backoff even, catch specific errors, and have your workflow branch off based on results, all without writing a single line of complex error handling code. Plus, you get a full detailed audit trail of every single step, which, for things like compliance and troubleshooting, is just invaluable. Check this out. This is a circuit breaker pattern. It's smart enough to check the status of a service before it tries to call it. And if that service is down, it just fails fast without even trying, which prevents this cascade of failures across your system. Now, trying to code that logic yourself, yeah, that's a headache. But in step functions, it's just another part of the state machine's definition. This is a perfect example of moving that complex logic out of your code and into configuration. All right, this is the question I know you've been waiting for. This all sounds great, but what is it going to cost me? And that's a critical factor, so let's break it down. So the pricing models are just fundamentally different. With Lambda, you're paying for each request and for the amount of time your code is running, measured in something called gigabyte seconds. With standard step functions, you pay for each step, or what's called a state transition, in your workflow. It's a totally different way of thinking about cost, right? It shifts from pure compute time to the complexity of your workflow. And here's the absolute key takeaway on cost. For a super simple two-step process, sure, a Lambda chain might be cheaper. But the second you introduce any kind of waiting or retries or complex logic, step functions often becomes way more cost-effective. And why is that? Because you are no longer paying for that expensive idle wait time where a Lambda function is just sitting around doing nothing. The cost of a few state transitions is often way, way less than paying for an idle function. Okay, so with all of this in mind, how do you actually make the right call for your next project? Let's distill all of this down into a super clear guide. You really need to think about your workflow's complexity. If it's a single, straightforward task or maybe a really short chain of just a few steps, Lambda is your best friend. It's simple, it's fast, it's cost-effective. But the moment you start introducing complex business logic, or branching, or long waits, or you just need really robust, visible error handling and auditing, well, the scale tips heavily in favor of step functions. Here's a simple mental flowchart for you. Is it one job? Use Lambda. Simple. Is it a series of jobs? Okay, now you should start thinking about step functions. Does that series of jobs involve waits, or retries, or branching, or maybe parallel work? Stop thinking about it. Step functions is purpose-built for exactly that scenario. It's the clear choice. So the most important thing to take away from all this is that it's not about which tool is better. It's always about which tool is right for the job you have in front of you. You know, you wouldn't try to build an entire house with just a screwdriver. Lambda is that perfect screwdriver for one specific task. Step functions, that's the power tool set you need when you're ready to build a whole house. And that's really the question I'll leave you with. When you look at the processes you're building next, are they simple, single-shot tasks? Or are they complex journeys with multiple stops, potential detours, and a very specific destination? Your answer to that question will tell you exactly which tool you need to reach for.